There comes a point in every camp director's career, hopefully, again, like last episode, not every summer, but there comes a point in which you're going to have to deal with firing somebody. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the CampHacker podcast, brought to you by Ultra Camp. My name is Travis Allison. I am a summer camp marketing and strategy consultant, and I'm excited to have you all here. I'm going to turn things to Chris.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Hudson. I'm a social worker in New York City, but I'm also the camp director of a camp called Camp Highlight, which is a one-week sleepaway camp for children who have LGBTQ parents.
Hi, folks. I'm Rachel. My pronouns are she, her, and I have been the summer camp director of an all-girls nonprofit camp in Ontario, and I am a member of the Ontario Camps Association board.
My name's Joe Richards. I am the executive director and soon to be only staff member at Pierce Williams Summer Camp and Retreat Facility in southwestern Ontario, part of the United Church of Canada's camping network in Canada.
Excellent. As we get things going here, I want to take just a second and welcome Rachel. We're so grateful for you for stepping in. Rachel, as many of you know, is one of the co-hosts of the Beyond Camp podcast on the Go Camp Pro network. But Rachel, we're so grateful to have you here. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited.
Right on. Rachel, just one quick question for you. How did you get involved in summer camp?
How did I get involved in summer camp? Growing up, I went to summer camp a little bit. My cousins ran a horseback riding camp in Saskatchewan that I went to every summer.
Yeah.
And I just knew that I wanted to work at summer camp. So when I turned 17, I went on the Ontario Camps Association website and just started applying to camps.
That's great. That's great. And did you go straight to Girl Guides?
No, I went through a few camps, different private and nonprofit camps, and then ended up at Girl Guides.
Right on. Right on. Well, welcome. We're so grateful to have you.
Thanks.
Before we begin our topic, I want to remind folks that you help us get found by sharing this podcast with your friends. If you leave us a rating using the podcast app that you use all the time, that's helpful. Also, I would invite you to just take a screenshot of you listening to this podcast and text that over to a friend who's in the camp business. We're always grateful for the new listeners who will join us. I'm looking forward to the influx of Beyond Camp listeners who are coming to CampHacker from the first time because they're following Rachel's wisdom over from her show to ours. Today, we are talking about firing people and when we need to do it, what we need to do to prepare for it, and how we can be as campy, thoughtful, and intentional about this process as possible. Chris, you suggested this topic. Was there a particular reason why?
Yes. First of all, I tend to not shy away from difficult conversations. And also, I tend to not shy away from giving or receiving feedback. So I know firing can be really hard for people, but the way that we usually set it up at camp is sort of like it's the inevitable conclusion of a couple of discussions that have happened. And the reason why I want to bring it up is because I think it does give people a lot of anxiety. But you can, if you structure your process in such a way, it doesn't have to be. I mean, setting up like the firing matrix as it was really happens at hiring, and being very clear about your intentions for hiring for this position, your intentions for the team, and what's acceptable and what is like really, like what are the indicators that we are singing as a team? And then what are some indicators that we're flagging? And what are the indicators that maybe the team needs to be disrupted or changed? All of that can be in the opening interview. Like that's all part of hiring. So hopefully you don't have to get to the firing. But that's why I wanted to bring it up. Also, I want to know I want to hear tips and tricks from you all, because I like the way that we do it. It's very humane. And like I said, it's a process that has started already by the time you get hired. And we put the fear of God in people, because much like our kids, our staff wants to be there too. They really want to be there and they really want to impress us. So when we start off the conversation like, hey, listen, if this doesn't work out, our firing procedure goes like this, we'll have a conversation with you. When the kids are away, you'll gather all your things and we're going to remove you from the campsite ASAP, and we'll handle the fallout. You won't see the kids again. We let people know that up front, because I think it's helpful for them to know that we are thinking about their employment life cycle, the entire thing at once, and not just crossing our fingers and hoping for the best. Like, we are prepping and planning everyone for success while at the same time allowing for the possibility that maybe we won't get there.
Absolutely. Rachel, I'm glad you're here because you've been a camp director for a period of time and now you've moved into the risk management side of things. I know that HR is not your specific area of expertise, but I'm curious for you, what are the before you get to camp things that have to be in place to for a camp to be ready in case this needs to happen?
So I think one of the benefits of working for a large organization is that we have a large HR department behind us. So we work really closely with them to make sure that all of their policies are camp aligned. And so, for example, we have a really robust evaluation system that gets used throughout the summer. And part of that is a performance improvement plan. And so we adapt it so it can be used while we're at camp for our staff. And so that's all available and ready to go. And we know that our HR staff are going to be able to speak our language and have that clear communication so that we can, when the time comes, because often it inevitably does, we can all be on the same page about that. So we have all of the evaluation documents prepared, the performance improvement plan, which is sort of, we're not at a regular stage of evaluation, but like something's gone off the rails. We need to have a serious conversation with timelines. We have that all prepared ahead of time, so it's ready to go.
I like your point about working within a larger organization and teaching them to speak camp language and camp expectations, because I know that's often a struggle for people that work for big organizations that run summer camps, as well as whatever their bigger mission is, that there's often a mismatch between the people who are looking after HR or other things involved in camp running. That's really smart. And a performance improvement plan would come into place. So I don't want to get too far down. So before someone's hired, they will know that in case there's a problem, here are the steps that are laid out, Rachel?
Yes, that's all part of it. So they're aware of our process in terms of if things go poorly or you aren't meeting expectations, here's how this will work.
Yeah. And Joe, for you, I know that setting expectations is something that you have been really intentional about, certainly with your one-line job description. What are some of the other things that you set up ahead of time so that people know your expectations and what will happen?
So this conversation about firing staff, we're talking about summer staff at this moment in time in my head, as opposed to full-time staff.
Great. Yeah.
Because those are two very here in Ontario, at least, those are two very different things for necessity and legal reasons. But in summer staff, and with most staff, but in summer staff especially, the expectation is key. So in the interview years ago, when I was first attending OCA stuff in the late 90s and early 2000s, I made a real point to attend every session that anybody from Robin Hood led on staffing. And so at that time, that would be Howie, who is another co-host of the Camp Owners podcast, and Howie and Sari and Larry, and Saul was doing some of those sessions as well when he was at Robin Hood. And the reason I did that is because they hire a ton of staff, and they had this document called it's an expectations sheet that everybody reads before their interview, so you know what you're getting into.
Yes.
And we took that expectation sheet and we read it. I used to read it with them during the interview. And then if they were under 18, I would send it home with them and have their parents read it and sign it as well, so that nobody could come at me and say, you didn't tell us this. And I was like, I did tell you this. But the language that I end up using a lot is the language of choice, right? Here's our policy manual. Here's what our expectations are. And the way that we're going to frame this with every staff member is that this is about choice. And you can choose to follow our policies or you can choose not to follow our policies. But understand, by the time you get across the table from me, You've made the choice that you don't want to be at camp, and all I am is the facilitator of your choices. It's not about me not liking you. It's not about me having a prejudice against you. What it is it's about me facilitating your choices. And what we've found long term is that has really eliminated the dreaded poison pill. So the idea of the poison pill, for those who don't know, is this idea that one staff member is horrible and you're going to fire them, and they somehow convince 3 other people that they're all going to quit if you fire them, right? So, well, you can't fire me because these 3 people are going to quit too. So then you're going to be down 4 staff members, right? So, and at this point in my career, I won't even bat an eye at that. I'm like, then just leave, right? Like, but with the language of choice, what happens is you have friends saying to the person who has made the choices, why are you making these choices, right? Like, why did you make the choice to leave? And I'm fine with them being friends after, right? Even when we fire, so, when we invite somebody to leave, facilitate their choices, but it's the way they talk about it, right? So it's never it's about choice, and B, I never speak about that person again, right? I don't bring it up with staff. I don't use them as an example. Right? The most powerful emotion isn't hate. The most powerful emotion is indifference. And so once you've left, why would I have put any emotional attachment or any energy in talking about you? But it's really that setting the expectations is key, but the wording of choice has really changed it for us.
I think it's really important. First of all, everything you said, Joe, I 1 billion% agree. And I think it's really important, especially if your camp works with young people, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. It's a great opportunity to introduce them to work behavior and professional behavior. When you're telling the story about the poison pill, and it's like there's something so juvenile in that threat. Well, you can't fire me because it's like, well, as a result of this conversation, do you want to stay? Like, we just talked about how you're not meeting expectations, and now you're saying you can't be fired and that I should allow you to stay, otherwise you'll take my staff. Well, this is not a hostile situation, sir. Like, you don't have to be here. And I think it's really important. Sometimes we think about, we're here changing the children's lives, but the young people we work with, we're changing their lives too. And I want to be really clear about this because I'm not certain who on my staff or former staff listens to this podcast, but like we have gone through an evolution. We used to not be good at firing. And it took a couple of situations where we had to really sit down and be like, okay, what's going on here? And really finding where the difficulty was for us. And the difficulty was like, oh, we don't want anyone to leave here and talk and say bad things about us, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's like you said, Joe, like once you lay it all out, like, and you're making a choice, this is what we're about. You can choose to be here or not be here. It really takes so much of the pressure off of the employer, I find. But yeah, like it is definitely, we've definitely gotten better. I've definitely gotten better after a decade of doing this.
The thing that really solidifies it in my mind is this in the best interest of camp? Right.
Yeah.
And I get it that there are directors out there who give second and third chances to staff members, but camp is about the camper's experience. And if it's not in the best interest of camp, I'm always going to side with the best interest of camp, because in the end, that's what I'm going to be judged for. And that's what Pierce Williams is going to be judged for. Not, oh, well, this staff member really needed our support at camp. I get it. They need support, not from me.
That was one of my biggest learnings as a new camp director, because I felt bad and I was like, well, I could just work with them. And it's like, camp is for the campers, not for the staff per se. There's a lot that they gain from it, but you have to draw that hard line that you're there to coach the staff, and they're there for the campers. It's not therapy for the staff to get them through whatever they're working through.
Well, and I think that's
coaching the staff is, I think, the key word, Rachel. We're there to coach the staff. We train them before camp and we coach them during. We're not training them throughout all the time.
Yeah. And I think that's a really great point too, because I think camp directors, camp leaders do their job well by looking after their staff and then having that staff being good at looking after the kids. But that has to be the limit. When looking after that staff member impacts camp for the kids, then that's a problem. Gab wasn't able to join in today, but I want to pull back and highlight something that they do at Waro that I just love. Because it's Gab who does it, it's beautiful. They have a pre-interview guide. So the same as Joe described, Waro has this, that if they have time between person applying and their interview, they mail them this booklet. So if you are not watching us on YouTube, you're just listening to us, then this is a half-page size booklet that is, I don't have the page numbers, but it's about 25 or 30 pages of this is the culture of camp. This is the expectations of you. It's Waro, so they very clearly lay out that this is a camp that focuses on language skills. We build community through switching between French and English every couple of days, and and all the stuff that Gab always says, we're positive, grow community, etc. That's all laid out in there. So before they have their first experience, exactly as we've talked about, Waro has this great little booklet, and you can look in show notes from it. We've talked about this booklet so many times. Look through the show notes for a copy of this, because Waro is very kind enough to put it on their website, and lots of camp people I know have used it as a setup. So that's building expectations. That's getting them to camp with a bit of a clear eye. We all know that when camp staff arrive at camp, a lot of the prep stuff, if we haven't reinforced it, their interview might have been 6 or even 8 months before, when we said, here are your expectations, sign off on them. And then we have to go through a training and get them set back up again. And, that the coaching that Chris is describing is often just reinforcing, we trained on this already, and here's my best, kindest way to just reinforce some of those good things. And staff training is incredibly overwhelming. You're excited to be there. You're grateful to be back at camp, but there's a ton of stuff that your camp leaders are trying to wedge into your brain and make stick. So I think there's important things that happen at training then to reinforce policies, to talk them through. I think, and this took us a long time to figure out to do, but I think it's the actual act of signing off. I have read this piece. And keeping track, if staff for some reason have to go miss some training, keeping track of who's had what training and that they sign the sheet that they attended the training sessions, all of that's very important legally. But there can be training techniques that make this more obvious and talk about some of the bigger implications and the most important things. We had policies and all these sign-off things, but we would still do a half-hour session every year that's called "This is how you get fired." It included "This is what happens when you do get fired," but this is like straight out. And it was always our mission to do as creative and engaging a staff training as possible. But this was half an hour with no skits, no scenarios. This is like, you understand, this will get you fired, and this is what it will look like, so that it was very plain. And that was one of the things that we did to really lay that out. Are there other things that you do in training that reinforce your message or really get them to reconsider and think about stuff?
We have a large document called Terms of Engagement that comes from our HR department. And so everybody has to read it and sign back. If you're under 18, your parents also have to sign it, which is great. But you've read it months before you've shown up. Have you read it, or have you just signed it? It's hard to know sometimes. So we play Camp Cranium and we put all the policy into there. So there's a bit of a game, but I always come in at the end and I'm like, and these are the serious points here. And the game is done, sort of the fun is done. And I, as my mother used to say, read them the riot act. Like this is the go, no go zone here. And that always seems to help, because everybody has to attend this one piece of training. You can't miss it. And we really highlight those key points.
I think, as I said before, at training, at hiring, we talk about expectations, but in training, we really double down. And while we don't do it as aggressively as you were talking about, Travis, like, this is how you get fired, but like, there is definitely a conversation of what happens when you are fired, and all the steps that we will take to make sure that we don't get there. we meet with each staff to give them they do a self-evaluation, and the assistant directors go over that with them and give them feedback and make a performance improvement plan if necessary. We do it halfway through. And so I don't want to say that the specter of being fired is there, because I also don't want to give the wrong impression of what's happening at Camp Highlight. It's not like a high pressure situation, but we are extremely serious about the work that we do there, and we communicate that all through training. Not only are we safeguarding the welfare of these children, and not only are we changing their lives, but also we want to be good role models, not just as like safe adults, but also as employees. Like, we have jobs here, and we are modeling for them what on the job behavior looks like, and we take that extremely seriously.
Yeah, I think that during training, it's really, so in hearing you both talk, it's also this idea that we at Pierce Williams have a unique contract structure because it's week by week. It's not, I'm not booking you for the entire summer. And so that allows us, we always say in our contracts, right? Like, we'll have you for staff training week, and here's the weeks of work that we have you for, but those might change based on camper number or need. And so for us, we talk a lot about the fact that you're evaluated every week. And that is something that really surprised a lot of, that can surprise people if you're not used to weekly evaluations. But because you have staff coming and going, it's not always the same staff there each week. It's really important to do these evals each week. And what can sometimes happen is our staff have no clue that somebody's been let go, because we just replace them in the roster over the next few weeks, or we say, listen, you're just not performing. And we've had this talk with you at your week 1 eval. We checked in with you 5 times during the next week, which is 5 days long. And then, and then we invite you to do something else. And so I think that during staff training, when we talk about things of that nature, we talk about the expectations that we give them. That the other thing I've learned is we give them the eval. We're like, here's what you're being evaluated on. There's no, we shouldn't surprise you with it. I've talked on this podcast many times over the past 10 years about the evaluation, the 1, 2, 3, 4 system that I got from Marcus at Manitou. And we used to not tell the staff that we were going to rate them afterwards. But I share that with them now too. I'm just like, hey, listen, as soon as you come, like the first Friday night of weekend staff training for us, which happens in May normally, you're going to start to be evaluated. You're being evaluated at your interview. You're being evaluated to see where you fit, to see how what tools we need to give you for you to be successful. And during staff training, we don't do a session. I certainly don't do a session called How to Get Fired. But I know that we have led a similar session here that somebody else leads. But in all honesty, you can be fired for any number of reasons. It doesn't have to, right? There's immediate fires, right? Like there's immediate, I smoked dope. I on site with campers. I told sex stories of my sexual exploitations with campers. I threw a lighter into the fire on sleep out and burnt 3 camper holes in 3 camper sleeping bags. Okay, yeah, I'll fire for that. Right, like those are things.
Is that a true story, Joe? That's a true story.
Not only true story. This happened like when my wife was camp director in like 2006, 2007. And the girl who we let go because she did it just got married on site last week.
Camp World, man.
I did not bring it up.
Well, I'm going to bring this back because I have a question for the group, but okay, on that topic. But I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, and that's the key, is that you have these immediate firings, but then you also have just not good fit firings, right? Like in Ontario.
Yeah.
In Ontario, the rule is that for the first 3 months of any employment, full-time, summer, whatever, you can let somebody go for no reason whatsoever. And so with summer staff, it becomes really easy if they're only 2-month summer staff. With spring staff, it becomes there's a bit more of a window there where they could be a 4th month, but yeah, the immediate, our staff know. I certainly hope they know. What were you going to ask, Chris?
So, does it hit differently when you have to fire a former camper? And is the process different for anyone for you?
Or your own kid?
Oh, not like my own kid, but like a camper grows up, they've idolized the camp, and they come for their first year. You know, and I think this is true of
Yeah.
a lot of camps.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
definitely true of ours, but they're having so much fun. They never stop to think how the sausage gets made.
Mm,
So they just want to join the team. That's all they think about from when they're 8 years old.
yep.
But to make that magic happen, it requires, me and the other director and the assistant directors behind the scene barking, just screaming, crying, emoting, demanding all the time. And sometimes it gets really stressful and it can be very shocking for our kids. And sometimes they can't handle it and we have to let them go. I'm just wondering if anyone on this call, is the process different for you when you have to fire a former camper?
So I don't know if I don't think no, the process isn't different. The impact can be different. I think, and I was going to save this for the end, but I want to make sure I don't lose this particular thought, is the impact of someone who grew up here, who broke a rule that they've known about since they were 7. That is hard. You get to use that classic parent line. I'm not hurt. I'm just disappointed. But so yes, I think there's an emotional impact to that. The thought that I don't want to lose is that when you're hiring people who are, I mean, Joe's a little younger than the camps that I worked at, but when you're hiring people who are 17 to 25, there's a lot of delta in their emotional, social intelligence from one summer to the next. And there have been people that we fired that we brought back that we gave a chance the next year. Like, let's bring them in, let's see what how they've matured, because there's such a big difference in their growth. So sometimes you think, well, we'll see come December and January what changes have happened. But yeah, I think it's harder for people that you've known forever and have an attachment to, or some of those things.
So as someone who's worked at a century camp, when I was working at the Taylor Staton Camp company, firing someone who's a 4th generation camper also brings in other things. The challenge is that if you don't have a good way to communicate it beforehand, I don't think they understand what they're doing, even as a 19-year-old, right? I don't think they understand that they're putting their family's name at risk. And then that's when you get a call from the dad, who's a lawyer in Toronto, and is like, I'm a lawyer in Toronto. I was like, that's nice. Right. But I have, and then you get a call from the grandfather, right? Like you start to, and then the grandfather calls the old camp owner, right? Like, and and you're like, well, you gave kids marijuana. I'm not going to keep you on site. And as Travis said, it doesn't, anybody who we let go for non criminal reasons can always apply back, right? We invite staff at the end of the summer. At the end of every summer, there are certain staff that we invite to take a year away from camp the following year and grow. That's the thing we say: take a year away and grow. And if they apply back 2 summers from then and they did something to grow, that shows us, oh, they were thinking about this. If they apply back and they just spent the last summer at home playing, Xbox, then where's your growth, right? Like, so it's a matter when you're dealing with history, that can be a challenge. When you're dealing with a board member's kid, when you're a nonprofit camp, that's a different challenge. But a good board knows not to interfere with those things because it's totally a conflict of interest with the board, right? There's a question of should they be on the board if their child's a staff member. That's one. But B, you didn't meet the expectations and they made the choice to leave. So the language we use isn't just important for us to share with summer staff. It's important for us to share with our community.
Amazing. I totally agree. Rachel, in a case where somebody has had a build up to, 2 warnings and lots of remediation put in place by the camp organization that they just don't come up to, what's the day of look like that someone gets fired?
So I got some good advice when I started, which was for folks who aren't going to do something that looks criminal and is an immediate fire, but something that's going to have a buildup, is you're going to know in the first week or week and a half of camp that they're going to be a person who's maybe not going to make it. And so decide how much effort and time you can put in, how much energy, and then don't let it draw out all summer. So when the time comes and we've gone through all the things, our performance improvement plan has very specific times. So today is Monday at 2 p.m. By Tuesday at 1, you're going to show us this. By Wednesday at 3, you're going to show us this. And Thursday by 9 a.m., if this hasn't happened, then we're going to have to end your employment here. So we have they know that it's coming if they haven't hit those other check marks. And sometimes before we get to that third time frame, if there happens to be 3, they'll come to me and say, I've realized this is not the best place for me. And I often try and frame it as, we want you to take care of yourself if they're, overwhelmed, not keeping up. And, I'm concerned about you and how you're fitting in here. And so often by the time we get there, they've come to me and said, I think I need to leave. This isn't working out for me, because they know that they're not going to be able to hit those steps. But if we do get to that point, we try and have the camp be at another part. Camp I was at is quite large. So me, a couple of people, we try and do it outside in open space where the person can leave and we can see them, but they can have some time to release those emotions as they need before we move on our plan to get them off site.
Yeah, I think that especially, not especially for overnight kids, it's the same with a day camp. You have to have a plan to get them off site. That is one of the hardest days of being camp director I've ever had. It was before we had a plan to get them off site. It's like, okay, you're fired, and now we'll have to call your parents to drive 3 hours to get here to pick you up because you didn't come to camp with a car. And we just didn't have a plan for that. We're like, okay, now we need a plan to get you off site.
Yeah, so we always have those discussions ahead of time. If we're going to drive them somewhere, okay, it's going to be me and who else, and who's going to cover for me while I'm gone, and where are we going to drive them to, and who's going to speak to the parent, and for us as well, have we notified other folks in the organization, because often the person who's there doesn't necessarily have the authority. So all of those pieces have to be in place. If the parent's going to come get them, where are they going to stay until the parent comes to get them?
Yeah. Yeah, because I'll tell you, I mean, it's stressful enough having someone that you feel needs to get off site, but it is even more stressful for them to be on site for 6 more hours afterwards. And everybody knows that something's going on because it's camp, and it is just, can I go talk to them? Can I go talk to them? Can I go talk to them? Can we say goodbye to our girlfriends? Can we, this will never happen this way again. Yeah. Any day of advice from you, Chris?
Day of firing, just be as compassionate as possible. I think the couple of times that we've had to go this route, and some staff has been more surly than others. Luckily, we've never had something where it's drugs or sex or a blatant sort of thing. Usually it was sort of it's strange strains of insubordination, or a buildup, like Rachel was saying, or just a bad fit, which is where we are with the campers who've grown up. It's just a bad fit for them to be on the other side. Day of, just be as compassionate as possible. And I think everyone has been saying throughout this, is really lay out, listen, this is what the expectation is. This is how you performed. This is what we've tried. This was your renewed effort and the result of that. And this is where we are now. So this is the choice that I have to make. We've done everything we can, just really describing the life cycle. I really like the way that you put it, Rachel. It's very it's strategic. It's clear. There's deadlining in there, which I love. And I think especially especially when someone is commenting on your performance, it could really feel like, well, I don't know what to do. Like the way that you laid it out, I think is so clear. And someone who's ordered like me would really put my mind at ease. Like if I could just focus on, I need to get this done by Tuesday at 9 a.m. That's really great. But overarching, I think just have some compassion, because at the end of the day, no matter how people perform, and as long as it's not something egregious, this is someone who really wanted to be there and really went out of their way to come, travel, stay on uncomfortable cotting, and get paid not a lot of money because they wanted to really do this. And they failed to do it. And that's hard. And that's going to be hard their whole way home. And so just as much compassion as possible. We, for those who can receive it, we check in with people afterwards and be like, listen, we just want to let you know, like, this is how this went for us on the other side. And we just want to let you know how we arrived here and and this is why we had to act in this way. Because for our staff, we want them as they grow up, like, come on, like the answers to the questions you gave us on that exit interview were not the right answers. And when you go off in your career, if you say that to someone else, it's not going to work. And no one's going to tell you, which is why we're telling you. It's still coaching, even after they've gone.
And I think that's an important point. I don't need to add anything to the day of, because it makes sense. Everybody said that. The after, right, is another point that so you can, like Chris said, you can reach out to them, but the after, an old camp director, Ika, it was my camp director, and myself, we started to phrase it very differently for us. So when we debriefed after, we ended up moving to the task of what didn't we give them, right? We treat it, as opposed to treating it as their fault.
Yeah, smart.
We looked at it as like, well, what did we fail to provide them to be successful? Because when you're a young camp director, to all you young camp directors out there who feel like, what did I miss in the interview? You might have missed something. At one point when I was working at the Taylor Staton camps, I was hiring 240 staff members a year by myself before the internet was what it is. Phone calls, in-person interviews, the whole deal. And what my office meant, that was for 2 camps, for an all boys and an all girls camp. What my office manager said to me, like, after, because in any given summer, you would let go of 20 to 25 of those people. And what she said, and she didn't treat that as an abnormal number. What she said to me was, Joe, you're going to have some bad apples. And you just, right? And it's not that I interviewed all 240. They didn't have a culture of re-interviewing staff, so that you're not getting the full buy-in. But when you start to look at it as from, okay, well, where did we fail this person? And for us at especially here, when you're dealing with 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds as staff members, you want to give them success for life, or tools for success for life. And so when you're like, well, what did we fail to give them, and how can we make sure we give that to other people moving forward? And once we've changed, I would like to say that I thought of that when I was much younger, but that's not the case, right? Like, it was probably 10 years ago now, so I would be in my late 30s at the time. But the idea that Ika and I were like, well, yeah, it's part of it's on us, right? Like, we hired them, we gave them all the expectations, we gave them the language, and they still didn't succeed. So what can we do to make sure this doesn't happen? So that debrief after you let someone go is important for, I love this thought, is important for you as directors, but I put almost zero effort into telling the other staff why it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who shall remain nameless, who want to get the whole staff together and be like, well, this is why we let Billy Bob go. And, it doesn't, and I'm like, they're all going to know, right? They're all going to talk. I'm fine with that. I just don't know that the all staff meeting is necessary if it's small things or if it's big things, especially for us who have all staff meetings at the beginning and end of every week, so I can cover it off a couple of days later.
That little piece, the make sure you talk about it amongst yourselves after people go and get your own lessons in there is a great place for us to leave this off. So thank you all for that. And speaking of thank yous, I want to take a minute and thank UltraCamp for sponsoring the CampHacker podcast. Sometimes all the busy work associated with running a camp keeps us from seeing why we are there at camp, how keeps us from remembering why we're putting so much time and heart into running camp. And UltraCamp helps you get back to what you love and understand and really feel why you're at camp. So what does that mean? From UltraCamp's perspective, it means that you're not stressing about budget stuff, that getting involved in using UltraCamp as your camp database, there's a low minimum entry cost. There's clear pricing with nothing hidden. So you know going into your contract what you're getting and what it's going to cost you. There are also great flexible terms that you can talk to your UltraCamp representative about, and no long-term contracts. So exclusive to CampHacker listeners, for a limited time only, reach out to UltraCamp and tell them you heard about them on the CampHacker podcast. And that'll give you a free setup that'll help you with your migration and getting things set out there. If you find that this is a little suspect and a little hard to believe, then do reach out to them. They really want to talk to you. And they want to show you a future where you finally have the time to get back and focus on the kids and focus on your staff and your own why for being at camp. So please visit their website at summercampsoftware.com/camphacker and set up a time to chat with them. They look forward to meeting you, and we thank UltraCamp for advertising on the CampHacker podcast. That being said, we're on to our tool of the week. So for all of our new listeners who've come from beyond camp, the tool of the week is something that we ask our host to bring this new that makes them a better camp director, makes their life easier, and share with us. And Joe, I wonder if you'd like to go first and share your tool of the week.
Or sure, I would. I'm going to give you 2 tools for the price of 1.
Ooh.
So this actually comes from the podcast Cool Tools with Kevin Kelly and Mark Fowler. I'm
Frauenfelder, yeah.
Yes, that name too. They talked, one of the people talked about a knot cards, and I don't have them with me because they're upstairs. But essentially, it's laminated cards that are riveted together so that they spin, but they give you the basic knots. Because who needs to remember those knots if you just have a set of knot cards in your backpack that you have with you or in your pocket? And it is brilliant. I bought 3 different things to test it out. The knot cards came as a little set of cards, and then you find your rope. I bought one that comes with a set of cards and brings you rope. And then I bought the second tool, which is survival playing cards, because on these survival playing cards, if you're watching on YouTube, they have knots on the cards. So not only do you have a set of cards to play with when you're camping, you have knots, but they also have advice, right? So how to see long distances, or your best, right? The STOP acronym. And they come with, in case of emergency, cards that you can fill out and have in a very nice container that would go into your backpack, and that's what you travel with. I often travel with a deck of cards when I go to conferences and whatnot, and a set of dice because I like to gamble. And so this just makes sense. And they're sort of water resistant. They're not playing cards. I was just testing during the podcast because I can't write on it with my felt pen, but I can write on it with a Sharpie. I tested that. So there's a little Sharpie mark up here. So they're called UST survival playing cards, and then the Pro Knot. You can find those in the show notes.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. Rachel, what's your tool?
My tool is the visual timer. So I know many of us have about 1,000 things going on right now, and it can't be just me that seems to have an inability to focus. So I can set 15 minutes and watch the clock tick down as I focus on one task, take a little break, and then switch to another. And it's helping my productivity as the pandemic drags on.
I love that. Thank you. Well, again, check the show notes. And that is an iOS app, and we'll try to take a look and see if there's an Android version as well. Thanks, Rachel. What's yours, Chris?
Well, it's finally my turn, and I am unprepared. I have something in mind, and I want to recommend it, but I don't know if I can generate a link to it.
Well, I can help you with that.
I feel like lame describing this. So this was something that was great. Years ago, I found this deck of cards. And listeners, if you know what I'm talking about, you're like screaming at your phone right now. It was a deck of cards. There's like a ninja on the box. And the idea, like on the cards, there's every card is like a nice thing you can do for someone. Like hold the door open for someone.
Yes.
The recognition.
Are they called
Hold the door
kindness
open.
cards or kindness deck?
It's something like that. And
Okay.
I'm sure like you can't patent this. So, and also not for nothing, like we're camp people, you can make this yourself. The idea was that it's just a list of like really nice things, like start a conversation with someone for 10 minutes about something they're very passionate about. Hold the door open for someone. Order a second snack from the vending machine, but leave it in the vending machine for the next person to come along. And then you leave them that card. So the idea is that you're doing nice things and then passing it on. So I would have a conversation with you, Rachel, for 10 minutes, something you're passionate about. Then I'd be like, oh, well, thank you so much for that conversation. It was really enlightening. This is for you. And the card instructs you that you are to do the same, add your name to the bottom of the card, and then pass it along. So then by the end of camp, there's like, these cards are being passed around. Everyone's just doing fantastic things. And it's like a list of people who have done those things. Between the time of me saying this and this show airing, if I can find the link to the precise product that I'm thinking of, I will put it in the show notes. If not, take this idea and do it yourself. DIY is sort of like the backbone of camping. So, but it's a lot of fun and everyone gets excited to do nice things. Cause it's like, I held the door open for you. Now this is for you. You go do it for someone else. And it's just great stuff.
And you can use a previous tool of the week and buy a set of blank playing cards from Amazon to create your own, or even just recipe cards, which might be easier to write on. But yeah. I love that idea, Chris. Thank you.
I was thinking index cards because they're even cheaper, and we all have 4,000, 5,000 of them sitting around. So.
Yeah, totally. Right on. Thank you. My tool of the week is a book called Get Together, and it is a nice, simple, well-designed cover because I just like the colors. But it is written it was commissioned by the people at Stripe that do online payments, but it's all about building communities. It's kind of focused on building online communities, but you've heard me say on the show before that I think that's an incredibly important skill for camp survival, is that we get good at online community building. But it's not just that, and it's a bunch of really good ideas. It's one of those good books that each chapter has a review page and some tasks for you to do. And, the first 3 or 4 pages around some of the good ideas about building community online or in person. And then the rest of it is case studies, stories of real people that have done it. One of my favorites, of course, is some favorite Canadians who started choir, and their story is included in this book. And so just great examples like that, inspiring, good ideas, great to give you something fun to read between now and camp to get some cool ideas of how you build and grow your camp community. So thank you all for being here. Thanks for a great conversation. Rachel, we're so grateful that you could join us and share your expertise and your experience. And Rachel, if people want to follow up with you or have any questions, where do they get in touch with you?
Folks are always welcome to send me an email at kentar@girlguides.ca.
Excellent. And Chris?
You can email me at chris@camphighlight.com. You can look for Camp Highlight on Instagram at Camp Highlight. And you can also shoot me a DM on Instagram at PlanetChris1.
Excellent. Joe?
You can email me, joe@campisbetter. Life is good. Camp is better. Campisbetter.com. Yeah.
Excellent.
Oh,
Please also go check out Rachel's Go Camp Pro podcast, Beyond Camp, where Rachel and Cassie talk about some great stuff. Rachel, what's a highlight of the last couple of shows that that you've been excited about from your show?
Oh, we've had some great conversation, but we had a fabulous one with Elena talking about body positivity at camp and diet culture,
Right.
which I'm really stoked for folks to listen to and delve into another aspect of camp.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you all for listening and being a part of the CampHacker podcast community. Thank you all for what you do for camps and young adults in the world. Thanks for the evening, friends.